A U.S. warship enters the East China Sea and heads close to China's biggest city. That's after a Chinese aircraft carrier passed through an important Japanese waterway. Amid Beijing's increasing aggression in the Indo-Pacific, the German defense minister says the West must not be the weaker one. The U.S. Major League Baseball expands its contract with a Chinese company with significant ties to the CCP. The NBA previously had some issues with programming in China. A Chinese couple lost their assets after volunteering for their community during the pandemic. One of them has been forced to quarantine for over 70 days. And a reporter in Malta was killed while investigating a potential web of corruption. Now investigations have found a Chinese man after piecing together the money trail she was following. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Some updates on U.S. activities in the Indo-Pacific. Tensions are rising in waters surrounding China. Last Sunday, a group of U.S. aircraft carriers and warships entered the South China Sea. A day before that, a U.S. destroyer entered the East China Sea. The warship also went near the Yangtze River estuary. That's where China's biggest city, Shanghai, is located. The warship then marched south. In the south is Taiwan, and Beijing has been flexing its muscles at the island. A Chinese think tank says the U.S. destroyer was targeting the East China Sea as it's headed towards this area right after it left Japan. The U.S. military's move comes after a Chinese aircraft carrier passed through an important Japanese waterway. The Chinese carrier was on its way to conduct drills around Taiwan. Germany seems to be getting more serious about countering communist China. The country's defense minister described the communist country as a very power-conscious state, not only when it comes to its economic interests and its immediate regional neighbors. She said this in an interview with German media R&D last Saturday. She added, China clearly claims to shape the world order in its own way and to force the weaker to behave in a certain way. We, that is to say Europe and the West, must not be the weaker ones. Later this month, Germany's foreign minister and defense minister will meet with their Japanese counterparts. The meeting will focus on the increasing aggression of the CCP in the Indo-Pacific region. This will be the first meeting of this kind between the two countries. And in August, a German warship is set to cross the South China Sea. This will be the first time in almost 2 decades. The Quad alliance, consisting of the U.S., Japan, India, and Australia, is joining a military exercise led by France. The 5 nations say they are trying to improve maritime security in the Indo-Pacific in order to confront Beijing's aggression. The exercise is held in the Bay of Bengal from April 5th to 7th. When it first started in 2019, only the U.S., Japan, Australia, and France participated. But this time, India is also joining for the first time. The French embassy in India says this is an opportunity to promote cooperations in a free and open Indo-Pacific. China affairs commentator Wang He told the Epoch Times he thinks there are 2 factors behind India's decision to join. The first is India's border conflict with Beijing last year. The second is France's deeper cooperation with India in the Indo-Pacific. 30% of global trade goes through the Indo-Pacific, but Beijing's militarization of the South China Sea may seriously threaten freedom of navigation there. French media FRI says both France and the Quad countries feel the growing threat of communist China in the region. The Chinese regime sent out over 380 warplanes to the Taiwan Strait last year. The number is even higher this year. Meanwhile, in the South China Sea since early March, the regime has sent out more than 220 Chinese fishing boats to Philippines' claimed waters. The move again escalated tensions between the two countries. At the same time, it sent out Coast Guard vessels to the Japan-claimed Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea. Leaked documents from China suggest that Chinese vaccines may have underlying health risks. That's because some Chinese authorities are actively avoiding getting inoculated themselves. A vaccination tally chart obtained by the Epoch Times shows that in China's northeastern Liaoning province, the majority of regime officials are dodging vaccine shots. In one town, over 90% of the officials don't want to get vaccinated. While they didn't plainly say that the vaccines are harmful, these officials are saying they won't get inoculated due to concerns for their own health. One official said that she won't get the vaccine because she's pregnant. Another cited a cold as the reason. Some bluntly said that they won't get it due to their poor health. In other cases, officials made it abundantly clear they would rather be highly at risk of being infected than to get the Chinese vaccines. Some authorities said they won't get the vaccine because of high blood pressure or diabetes. This despite the fact that these diseases make them highly vulnerable to the CCP virus. Despite some of its own officials' reluctance to get vaccinated, the Chinese regime is pushing its vaccines both inside and outside China. The country's Center for Disease Control and Prevention said they were aiming to vaccinate 70 to 80% of the Chinese population. China, meanwhile, has shipped its vaccines globally to 69 countries. We usually commend volunteers for helping others and serving their communities. But in China recently, a couple lost their assets after volunteering for their community during the pandemic. NTD's Becky Zhou has the details.
A Chinese couple tells NTD when the pandemic first started, they volunteered to supply food and drinks to local residents. But local authorities stopped them in January. Authorities say this is due to virus prevention measures. Now the husband has been forced to quarantine for more than 70 days. The northern Chinese city they live in was under lockdown for almost 50 days earlier this year.
When residents had no food or drinks, a few of us supplied them with lots of food.
But everything changed after 2 of their teammates contracted the CCP virus. Zhao says local officials forced her and her husband to quarantine at a hospital. Zhao was released recently, but her husband still has to self-isolate in a shelter away from home because he developed a fever 2 months ago.
All my test results were negative, but I've been forced to quarantine for more than 70 days. They told me that I can't get out even if my wife suffers a heart attack or another family member dies or gets married.
Chen says he still has to quarantine with no end in sight after the fever disappeared. This even has a negative impact on his father-in-law. His in-law loves to play mahjong, but all the other players are now keeping a distance from his in-law to prevent infection. But what hurts the couple the most is that local officials trashed their late daughter's personal belongings.
My daughter died of leukemia 3 years ago when she was 2 years old. The local officials threw away all her photos and clothes. They were priceless.
Zhao says local officials also took away their bank cards, wallets, cell phones, and business certificates after seizing their home key. The couple also couldn't run their business as usual. But still, local officials refused to offer any help. When Chen called them, one of the local officials got angry and redirected such calls to local volunteers.
The local officials love to have more money and power. They don't care if ordinary people die.
Chen says the regime even demanded that he sign a self-isolation agreement. Once signed, he has to isolate at home for another month and be monitored for another 3 to 6 months. Instead of signing the contract, they say they will get tested again to prove that they are not infected and therefore do not need to quarantine. Reporting by Becky Zhou, NTD News.
Taiwan just reported a case of African swine fever. Taiwanese officials believe the infected pig likely floated from China. NTD's Xu Wenhui has more.
Taiwan detected African swine fever virus in a dead pig that floated to the island over the weekend. It's the first and only case so far in Taiwan. The discovery immediately triggered emergency response measures. Taiwan's Council of Agriculture suspects the dead pig floated from outside of Taiwan because pig farms nearby are all in good condition.
This is the first time that we found a pig floating across the sea and landing on the coast of the Taiwanese mainland, and it's tested positive for African swine fever.
The Council of Agriculture's deputy minister says it's possible the dead pig came from China.
From our test, the DNA of the virus is 100% the same as that from China. And in our area, our dominant pig breeds are black, and the one found floating here is white. That's also proof.
He also says if the virus came from domestic pig farms, the death toll could have already been high. This is because it takes only 3 to 5 days for symptoms to show. African swine fever was first detected in China in 2018. It soon swept across the country the next year and reduced the nationwide pig stock by about 40%. Even now, cases are still around, and China also found several mutants earlier this year. The Taiwanese deputy minister confirms that the one found in Taiwan is not a mutant. Wenhui Xu, NTD News.
Coming up, the U.S. Major League Baseball expanded its contract with a Chinese company with significant ties to the CCP. This after the NBA had some issues with programming in China. More on that after the break. The U.S. Major League Baseball expanded its contract with a Chinese company with significant ties to the CCP. This happened just a day before the MLB boycotted Georgia. NTD's Grace Coulter has more.
Major League Baseball, or MLB, is facing backlash over its boycott of Georgia. This is because it's willing to do big business with Chinese state-owned companies and companies with close ties to the Chinese Communist Party, known for its human rights abuses, but it's boycotting the Peach State over election reforms. MLB has been doing business in China for years, but it's just come to light that only one day before MLB boycotted Georgia, the organization extended and even expanded its contract with Chinese tech giant Tencent, which has significant ties to the CCP. MLB claims Georgia's new voting laws amount to voter suppression. MLB Commissioner Robert Manfred said in a statement that the Georgia boycott would demonstrate MLB's values as a sport. But now, many people are wondering what exactly those values are, given the CCP's ongoing human rights abuses and genocide of Uyghur Muslims. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo shared an article on Twitter about MLB's partnership with Beijing Enterprises Real Estate Group, a top Chinese state-owned enterprise, and wrote, "Georgia's laws don't comport with MLB's values, but China's do?" Kentucky Senator Rand Paul said, "Your sports league might be a little too woke if it will freely do business with communists in China and Cuba, but boycott a U.S. state that wants people to show ID to vote." Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton responded to the Georgia boycott saying, "Hey MLB, how many days of early voting are allowed in China?" And General Spaulding, author of Stealth War, How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept, wrote, "The all-American game is now all-communist. Also, it wants no voter ID. Are you still blind to what's happening in America?" The CCP continues to carry out numerous human rights violations and religious persecution. Yet many large corporations have turned a blind eye to these atrocities in order to gain access to the China market. But over the last couple of years, as many of these corporations make accusations of oppression and human rights abuses in the United States while still doing business in China, a movement to boycott these corporations has gained momentum. A number of people are already saying they're canceling their MLB subscriptions.
Last month, CCP mouthpiece CCTV and NBA made a deal to resume regular programming in China. Many are concerned that NBA games would be broadcast in the same channel that airs communist propaganda. Back in 2019, CCTV boycotted the NBA over a tweet supporting Hong Kong protests. Under financial pressure, the NBA released a statement expressing regret for the tweet. Brookings Institution's senior fellow Senator Ryan just published a new book suggesting the U.S. government find stronger positions to influence China.
Ryan Hass is the Brookings Institution's senior fellow focusing on China and Asia. In a discussion about his new book today, he suggested that if the U.S. strengthens its position on China, it will gain more influence there. The U.S. government recognizes that the Chinese Communist Party is committing genocide. Hass says the U.S. should let China know they will pay a price for continuing on the current course.
We just need to speak out clearly and consistently at all levels, bilaterally, multilaterally, privately, publicly, at the presidential level and every level below it about the strength of our concerns about these issues, and the fact that as long as there is a shadow cast over the relationship by events in Xinjiang, it's going to be impossible for the relationship to return to any type of equilibrium that Beijing may seek.
Haas says there are fundamental differences between the U.S. and CCP views, and that if the U.S. lives up to its values, it will naturally strengthen its power. He also said it is important to let the Chinese people see the U.S. support for their efforts and their concerns.
It relates to Uyghurs, but it goes beyond that, to things like access to educational opportunity, to freedom of information, to air quality, water safety. The more goodwill the United States enjoys among the Chinese people inside China, the costlier it is for the Chinese leadership to take actions that clearly undermine the U.S.-China relationship.
Now we look to the aftershocks of a brutal murder. In 2017, the tragedy sent shockwaves throughout Europe. It also unveiled a potential web of corruption. Now, investigations have found that the Chinese businessman is at the heart of the money trail. It has to do with Malta, a small island nation in the middle of the Mediterranean, and the victim is one of Malta's most famous journalists, Daphne Galizia. Galizia is known for her work exposing corruption. She ran a blog where she posted her investigative reports, and it had more page views than the country's population. In 2017, Galizia was investigating a web of companies. She suspected they were funneling bribes to Malta's top politicians. One day after work, she climbed into her car to go to the bank. What Galizia didn't know was that she was being watched. Someone had put a remote-controlled bomb under her car seat. When the moment came, the killer activated the bomb, and Galizia became a ball of fire. The explosion was so powerful, it shook the windows of her home. Her son rushed to the scene barefoot, but he couldn't even see the body in the car. The only things he could find were glass and chunks of flesh on the ground. Galizia's death shook Malta. It brought down the country's prime minister.
Will you be accepting the results of the inquiry conclusions?
And also sent ripples throughout Europe.
I expect there to be a thorough and independent investigation, free from any political interference.
Months later, authorities arrested 3 suspects. One of them said Galizia was killed because she was going to publish some details on something. But at this point, the person behind the suspects was still a mystery. But her death didn't put an end to her investigation. Over 40 reporters came together and picked up the money trail she was following. And clues led them to a country halfway across the globe, China. Before Galizia died, she was investigating 2 mysterious companies. One is called 17 Black, the other called Mac Bridge. A source told her that these 2 companies are crucial to unraveling the corruption web. Also, a leaked email says these companies would send around 2 million euros to 2 politicians. One is Malta's energy minister. The other is a close aide to the country's prime minister. Galizia mentioned 17 Black many times on her blog. She believed it is connected to top politicians, but wasn't able to prove it. A year after her death, reporters finally dug out the owner of 17 Black.
Are you afraid to take alone the responsibility, Mr. Fenech?
His name is Jorgen Fenech, one of Malta's richest men. In 2019, Fenech tried to escape from Malta in his luxury yacht, but authorities arrested him at sea. He is charged with orchestrating Galizia's death. When police searched his apartment, they found the business card of a Chinese man named Chen Cheng. Later, police were able to squeeze out another clue from Fenech. They asked him about the other company in the leaked email, Mac Bridge. And Fenech said the name Mac Bridge stands for Malta-China Bridge, but didn't give more details. It is unclear if police asked him about the Chinese man. Mac Bridge turned out to be harder to track down, but reporters eventually found its roots in Hong Kong. It has a name that combines the Chinese characters for Malta and China. The company is set up in a way that makes it hard to find its owner. The Hong Kong register doesn't have the owner's name. The only clue reporters could find is the company's director, a Chinese woman in her 60s. After much digging, they found the woman to be the mother-in-law of Chen Cheng. He was the Chinese man on the business card in Fenech's place. From here, the puzzles that Galizia was trying to piece together start to fall into place. Chen is a key player behind a major deal between Malta and the Chinese regime in 2014. The deal allows a Chinese state-owned company to buy a third of the stake in Malta's only electricity supplier, Malta. During the negotiations, Chen represented the Chinese side, and then Energy Minister Konrad Mizzi oversaw the Maltese side. And the deal is also part of Beijing's controversial Belt and Road Initiative. The communist regime uses this project to expand its influence across the globe. On the surface, it's a massive investment project. The regime pours billions of dollars into building infrastructure for low-income countries. But critics say it's the regime's way of gaining influence over other countries. Beijing does it by using predatory loans and luring countries into debt traps. The regime then seizes those countries' strategic assets if they can't pay back the loans. At the time, the deal was the largest foreign investment in Malta, a whopping 300 million euros. But it already drew criticism at the time for giving the Chinese company terms that were too beneficial. Chen's importance doesn't stop at the energy deal. He also ties together the secret money flow in the leaked email. Following the energy deal, Chen persuaded Maltese electricity company Malta to buy another wind farm. After the deal was approved, Chen brought in a middleman into the game. Here's how it works. Phoenix company 17 Black gave the middleman a 3 million euro loan, and the middleman used this money to buy the wind farm. A week later, an accounting firm said in an email that 17 Black and MacBridge would send 2 million euros to the shell companies of its clients in a year. The firm's clients are the two politicians, then Energy Minister Konrad Mizzi and then Prime Minister's Chief of Staff Keith Schembri. This is the leaked email that led to Galicia's investigation of the two companies. Soon after, Malta's Malta bought the wind farm from the middleman at 10 million euros. That means the middleman made over 7 million euros. The middleman then paid back 17 Black the 3 million euro loan. But it also gave 17 Black the rest of the earnings as profits. After the deal went through, 17 Black gave one of Chen's companies over 1 million euros. Maltese authorities are investigating Chen's company. They suspect it was involved in paying bribes to Maltese politicians and also making a profit from it. Authorities are also looking into the wind farm deal. Of the two politicians, the former energy minister denies connections between his company and MacBridge. He was not charged. The former chief of staff Schembri says he has pending business plans with MacBridge and 17 Black, but denies any wrongdoing. As for energy tycoon Fenech, he is awaiting trial for allegedly masterminding Galicia's assassination. He has pleaded not guilty. In the meantime, Galicia's family is still coping with the grief. Her son Matthew says the new findings confirm what his mother tried to make others see, that the criminal entanglement of political and business interests is a major defining problem of our time. Corruption costs lives, just as it cost my mother hers. He adds that his mother would have been delighted to see this, that her work is being substantiated, and that she wasn't alone in her fight. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching, and see you tomorrow.